I am Gwendolyn Thompson, a 35-year-old CPA. Just 7 months ago, I was sitting in a freezing glass-paneled law office in Bellevue, watching my parents sign away my inheritance. They gave my older sister everything: the $1 million estate, a highly profitable 35-year-old company, and a huge cash trust, leaving me with absolutely zero. "You make things too complicated, Gwen," my mother sneered, her tone packed with decades of bitter favoritism. Next to her, Eloise just smirked, soaking in her victory. The attorney shuffled his paperwork in total silence. I refused to shed a single tear at all. I just got up, gave my sister a cold, deadpan stare, and walked straight out of that room without a word. A few days ago, my phone exploded with 48 missed calls. When I finally answered, my mother's arrogant tone had vanished. She was hysterically weeping, choking, barely able to talk. "Federal agents are raiding Eloise's house right now," she screamed, while a man shouted in the background. "They have guns and warrants. They're talking about money laundering and wire fraud." "Gwen, just what did your sister do with those funds?" I hadn't seen one single cent of that family cash. But my sister, the so-called perfect daughter who received the keys to the kingdom, made terribly greedy choices that would soon annihilate our parents' entire legacy. Before I explain how a spoiled golden child unwittingly financed an offshore crime ring and burned our family empire to the ground, please hit that like button and subscribe if you love seeing absolute justice served. Also, let me know, where in the world are you tuning in from right now, and what is your local time? Just leave a comment down below. But to truly understand the sheer panic in my mother's voice, you have to go back 3 years. Back to the rainy Friday afternoon when I actually tried to save my family from the disaster they were actively building. My fingers flew across the keyboard of my laptop, the harsh blue light reflecting in my glasses. I sat at my parents' massive oak kitchen table, surrounded by 3 years of scattered, wrinkled receipts and messy spreadsheets. The house was dead quiet, save for the rhythmic, heavy ticking of the hallway clock. Every tick felt like a hammer against my skull. I was a certified public accountant. I analyzed numbers for a living. I looked for patterns, for logic, for the hidden stories that money always tells. And the story I was looking at right now was terrifying. I rubbed my tired eyes, the faint scent of stale diner grease briefly ghosting through my memory. It was a smell I could never quite forget. I had smelled like that for 4 years, working night shifts to pay my way through Seattle University's grueling accounting program. I had taken out crushing student loans. I had studied until my vision blurred. I had done it all entirely alone. Eloise, on the other hand, had never smelled like grease. When she decided college wasn't for her, my parents celebrated her loyalty to the family business, Thompson Custom Woodworks. They bought her a brand new Toyota SUV and paid the rent on a gorgeous downtown apartment. When she graduated high school, they rented a country club for 120 guests. When I graduated college with honors, my parents didn't even show up. They were too busy helping Eloise manage the shop floor. My graduation dinner was a Tuesday night at Chili's, where my father spent half the meal taking business calls. I shoved the bitter memories down and forced my eyes back to the screen. The numbers were bleeding. Over the past 18 months, there were massive, unexplained cash withdrawals and bizarre wire transfers totaling nearly $90,000. No vendor invoices, no purchase orders, just the word consulting scribbled in Eloise's looping, careless handwriting. Even worse, she was writing off her personal spa retreats and car payments as business expenses. This wasn't just sloppy bookkeeping. It was a giant waving red flag that would trigger a brutal revenue agency audit. "Mom," I called out, keeping my voice carefully neutral. My mother walked into the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She had that familiar, tight look around her mouth, the look she always wore when she had to deal with me. "I need to ask you about these withdrawals," I said, pointing to the monitor. "Where did this $90,000 go? And why are Eloise's personal expenses mixed with the corporate accounts?" Instantly, the temperature in the room plummeted. Her face hardened, the skin pulling tight over her cheekbones. "That's company business, Gwen. I know it is," I said, leaning forward. My heart started a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. "But if the government audits you, their algorithms will flag these exact discrepancies. You need clear records of where this money went, or you're looking at severe tax penalties, maybe even fraud charges." The front door opened and shut with a loud bang. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hall, and Eloise walked into the kitchen. She stopped dead when she saw me, dropping a shopping bag onto the counter. Her arms instantly crossed over her chest, forming a defensive shield. "Are you seriously digging through our private finances?" Eloise snapped. Her eyes narrowed into dark slits. "Mom asked me to help with the taxes," I replied. I could feel the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach, the deep, exhausting ache of always being the outsider in my own home. "Helping with taxes doesn't mean interrogating us," Eloise shot back. She took a slow step toward the table, her jaw clenched. "You don't work here, Gwen. You don't get to parachute in from Seattle and tell us how to run things." I took a deep breath. "Stay professional," I told myself. "Stay calm. I'm just saying that if the government asks, you have to legally prove where that money went. It's a legal requirement. You can't just write off personal trips." My mother sighed. It was a long, theatrical sound, heavy with disappointment. "This is exactly why we don't ask you for help anymore, Gwen. You always find problems. You always make everything so complicated." "I'm trying to protect you from federal fines," I pleaded, my voice cracking just a fraction. "We don't need your condescending lectures," Eloise interrupted, flashing a tight plastic smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. "We've been running this business for 25 years. I think we know what we're doing." I looked at my mother. I waited for her to step in, to defend logic, to realize I was throwing them a lifeline. Instead, she just turned away. "Everything is fine, Gwen. Just file the standard paperwork." A cold, heavy silence settled over the kitchen. I looked at the two of them, so united, so completely unwilling to see the truth. Slowly, I reached forward and closed my laptop. The sharp click echoed like a gunshot. "Okay," I whispered. "I won't touch this, but you need to hire an independent auditor." I packed up my bags and drove back to Seattle in the pouring rain that very night. I refused to put my CPA license on the line for their lies. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought the worst they could do was ruin their own business. I had no idea the real betrayal was still waiting for me in the shadows. 3 years passed. 3 years of perfectly wrapped Christmas presents, polite Monday evening phone calls, and my mother's endless, breathless updates about Eloise's exhausting role at the company. I played my part. I kept my head down, paid off my student loans dollar by agonizing dollar, and built a wall of professional distance between myself and my family's reality. Then the email arrived. It came on a perfectly ordinary Wednesday morning in April. I was sitting at my desk in Seattle, the gray morning light filtering through the blinds, a hot cup of coffee warming my hands. The notification chimed, a sharp little ping that made me glance at my second monitor. Subject: Family Meeting. Your attendance required. From Leonard Goldstein, attorney at law. I stopped typing. The cursor blinked steadily on my spreadsheet, a tiny rhythmic pulse. Dear Gwendolyn, your parents have requested a formal family meeting to discuss important estate matters and asset restructuring. Your presence is required on Thursday, April 16th at 11:15 a.m. at my office in Bellevue. Please confirm your attendance. Regards, Leonard Goldstein Esquarg. I stared at the screen until the black letters started to blur. Estate matters? Asset restructuring? I picked up my coffee, but I couldn't bring myself to drink it. It suddenly felt cold in my hands. My father was 66 and famously healthy. He still hauled massive slabs of raw cedar across the shop floor just to prove he could. My mother was 63 and ran 4 miles every single morning in the Bellevue drizzle. Why were we suddenly rushing to discuss estates in the middle of a work week? A heavy, creeping dread began to pool in my stomach. I reached for my phone and typed a quick, casual text to Eloise. "Hey, do you know what this Goldstein meeting is about?" I set the phone face up on my desk. I watched the little delivery checkmark turn into a read receipt. 1 minute passed, then 10, then 4 hours. She was ignoring me. She had read it, processed it, and actively chosen silence. That evening, I stood in my small, quiet kitchen and called my mother. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. "Hello?" Her voice was brisk, her tone carefully guarded, lacking its usual melodic greeting. "Mom, I got an email today from a lawyer, Leonard Goldstein. What's going on?" I paced the length of my kitchen, my bare feet quiet against the hardwood. "Is someone sick? Is the business in trouble?" "No one's sick, Gwen," she said. There was a strange, unnatural stiffness to her words, like she was reading from a script she had memorized. "We just need to discuss some long-term family business planning. Can you make it Thursday?" "I'll have to use my paid time off," I pressed, trying to find a crack in her armor. "Mom, can you at least tell me what this is regarding so I can prepare? Are we looking at tax liabilities?" There was a micro pause on the other end of the line, a tiny, shallow intake of breath. Thursday at 11:15, she said, her voice dropping into a hard, flat register I rarely heard. Gwen, please don't be late. Click, she hung up. I stood in the silence of my apartment, staring at the darkened screen of my phone. The next morning, I drove down Interstate 5 South, fighting a deep, persistent pit of nausea. The wipers beat rhythmically against the windshield, sweeping away the light spring rain. My mind, trained to analyze data and predict outcomes, raced through 100 different possibilities. Maybe they were finally setting up proper retirement accounts and needed my professional CPA advice. Maybe they wanted to discuss selling the business and transitioning to a passive income model to escape the daily grind. Or maybe, my grip tightened on the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. A desperate, almost childish hope flared in my chest. Maybe they are finally fixing Grandma Delilah's will. My grandmother had died 6 years ago. She had been the only person in that house who looked at me and saw someone worth protecting. At her funeral, her personal lawyer had explicitly mentioned a trust fund, an equal distribution to both granddaughters to ensure their independent futures. But in the chaotic, grief-stricken weeks that followed, my parents had aggressively taken control of the logistics. They told me I needed to focus on my new career in Seattle. They told me they would handle the complex probate paperwork. I was 29, drowning in debt and devastated by the loss. I had trusted them. I had never seen a single dime. Maybe now, I thought, pulling off the highway exit into Bellevue. Maybe now they are finally ready to disperse those funds and make things right. I should have known better. I should have known that hope was just another liability. Leonard Goldstein's office was located in a sleek, hyper-modern glass building off Valley Boulevard. Everything about it screamed quiet, intimidating wealth. I arrived 15 minutes early. Despite the mild, humid spring weather outside, my hands were inexplicably freezing. The air conditioning inside the lobby hit me like a physical wall. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled hair, barely glanced up from her glowing monitor. "Thompson family meeting?" I asked, my voice sounding a little too thin in the cavernous space. She clicked her mouse twice. "Conference room C, down the hall to the left. You can go right in, they're already inside." Already inside? The words dropped like stones into my stomach. Of course they were. They hadn't arrived separately. They had pre-gamed the meeting. I walked down the long, quiet hallway. The thick, expensive gray carpet completely swallowed the sound of my footsteps, making me feel like a ghost haunting my own life. As I approached Conference Room C, my breath caught in my throat. The door had a large, frosted glass panel. Through the blur, I could see their silhouettes. My father, my mother, and Eloise. They were sitting close together around a massive, polished mahogany table. I stopped just inches from the glass. I couldn't hear the exact words, but I could hear the tone, a low rumble from my father, followed by a light, easy laugh from Eloise. Someone clinked a coffee cup against a saucer. It sounded so relaxed, so warm. They hadn't waited for me in the lobby. They hadn't saved me a seat next to them. They were inside, warm and united, a private club that had never truly granted me membership. I closed my eyes for 1 second, fighting the sudden, sharp sting of tears. Then, I put my freezing hand on the heavy brass handle, took a slow, deep breath, and pushed the door open to face the jury. I pushed the heavy door open. The thick brass handle felt like ice against my palm. 4 heads snapped toward me. The light, easy laughter died instantly, sucked out of the room as if someone had pulled a plug. For a split second, nobody moved. The air in the room suddenly felt thick and heavy, smelling faintly of rich, dark roast coffee and expensive paper. "Gwen, you made it," my father said. He didn't say, "It's good to see you." He didn't say, "Thanks for making the long drive in the rain." It was just a flat, clinical statement of fact. As he spoke, he adjusted his heavy silver watch, deliberately avoiding my eyes. "Hi, Dad, Mom, Eloise," I replied, my voice careful and measured. My mother gave a single stiff nod, her lips pressed into a thin white line. Beside her, Eloise offered a tight, perfectly practiced smile. It was a smile made entirely of muscles, completely detached from the cold, calculating look in her eyes. Her fingers were wrapped so tightly around her coffee cup that her knuckles were pale. Leonard Goldstein stood up, smoothing the front of his expensive gray suit, and extended a manicured hand. "Miss Thompson, please come in, have a seat." He gestured with his silver pen toward a lone chair at the extreme opposite end of the long mahogany table. It was a clear, physical isolation. They were clustered together at the head of the table like a unified front. I was being placed on a deserted island, 20 feet away. I walked the length of the room and sat down. The leather chair creaked loudly in the unnatural quiet. I looked at the table. My analytical brain, trained to instantly assess spreadsheets and spot missing data, immediately took inventory of the scene. In front of my parents and Eloise were neat, color-coded folders. They were thick, heavily tabbed with sticky notes, and clearly reviewed well in advance. In front of my seat, nothing, not a single piece of paper, not a pen, just the cold, dark reflection of the polished wood staring back at me. "Would you like some coffee or water before we begin?" the lawyer asked politely, settling back into his oversized leather chair. "No, thank you," I said, keeping my hands perfectly still in my lap to hide the slight tremor in my fingers. "Let's just get to it." Goldstein adjusted his reading glasses. As he reached for the top folder, my mother and Eloise exchanged a subtle, loaded glance. It was a micro-movement, just a quick dart of the eyes and a tiny drop of Eloise's shoulders. But it made the bottom fall out of my stomach. Outside the floor-to-ceiling glass window, I could see tiny cars moving along the wet highway. People were commuting, buying groceries, living normal, uncomplicated lives. But inside this room, the atmospheric pressure had fundamentally changed. It was hard to breathe. I felt like a defendant sitting in a courtroom where the jury had already been bought, the judge had been bribed, and the verdict was already sealed in the folder across from me. Goldstein cleared his throat. The sound was unnervingly loud. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice adopting a smooth, monotonous legal cadence. "We are here today to formalize the restructuring and distribution of family assets, as explicitly requested by Richard and Martha Thompson." He glanced up over his glasses at my parents. They nodded in perfect, rehearsed unison. "Let's begin," Goldstein continued, flipping the thick cover of the folder open. "The primary family residence located at 539 Oak Street, currently appraised at approximately $1.4 million, will be transferred via quitclaim deed to Eloise Thompson, effective immediately." I blinked, my breath caught in my throat. The house I grew up in. The house where Grandma Delilah had lived with us in the downstairs suite before she passed away. They were just handing it over? Eloise reached for her coffee, taking a slow, calculated sip. Her expression remained artificially blank. She wasn't surprised. She already knew every word of this document. "Furthermore," Goldstein droned on, turning a page, "the business entity known as Thompson Custom Woodworks, including all physical assets, warehouse inventory, intellectual property, and existing client contracts, will also be legally transferred to Eloise Thompson as sole proprietor." My father looked down at his hands, tracing a faint old scar on his thumb. "Additionally," the lawyer said, his voice never changing pitch, "the Consolidated Family Trust Fund, currently valued at roughly $900,000 in liquid assets, will be placed under Eloise's sole management and ownership, with Richard and Martha stepping down as primary trustees." The room violently tilted on its axis. My ears started to ring, a high, thin whine like a failing machine. I gripped the sharp, hard edge of the mahogany table under the rim where they couldn't see. The house, the business, $1 million in cash. Goldstein slowly turned another heavy parchment page. The thick paper made a dry, scraping sound in the quiet room. "And regarding Gwendolyn Thompson," he paused. He actually paused, his brow furrowing slightly as he scanned the rest of the page, as if looking for a misprinted footnote or a missing paragraph. "No assets have been designated at this time. You are officially excluded from the estate distribution." He closed the folder. The silence that followed was absolute. It was suffocating. It pressed against my eardrums, heavy and suffocating as deep water. I sat perfectly still at the far end of the long, empty table, staring at the people who had brought me into this world, as the crushing weight of what they had just done finally broke over me. The silence in the room was absolute. It pressed against my eardrums, heavy and suffocating as deep water. I sat perfectly still at the far end of the long, empty table, staring at the people who had brought me into this world, as the crushing weight of what they had just done finally broke over me. My analytical mind, the part of me that handled complex tax codes and massive corporate audits, tried to process the information. It tried to find the hidden logic, the missing variable that would make this equation balance. But there was no logic here, just a brutal, empty void. I finally found my voice. It felt like dragging stones across a dry riverbed. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" My mother didn't even let the lawyer answer. She leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly together on the polished wood, her knuckles white. "Gwen, we have discussed this very carefully as a family over the last few months. This is what makes the most logical sense for our legacy."
As a family. The word stung like a physical slap across the face. A family that didn't include me. A legacy I was suddenly permanently erased from. I wasn't part of that discussion, I fired back. The initial shock was melting, dripping away to reveal a sharp, cold clarity. I was an auditor. I dealt in facts. And the fact was, I was being robbed in broad daylight. My father finally spoke. His voice was quiet, almost a mumble. He still stared at the table, a coward hiding behind his wife's sharp edges. Eloge has been here, Gwen. She's helped with the business every day. She's been present. She knows the vendors. She knows the clients. I stared at him, the man who had taught me how to ride a bike, the man whose approval I had chased my entire life. And I haven't. Because I went and got an education? Because I worked night shifts so I wouldn't be a financial burden to you? My mother let out a long, theatrical sigh.
She tilted her head, looking at me like I was a stubborn, foolish child who couldn't understand a simple math problem.
You chose to leave, Gwen. You chose your own independent path in Seattle. You made it very clear you didn't want to be part of this shop. Eloise chose family.
I felt the blood drain completely from my face, leaving my skin cold and prickling. I looked at each of them. I searched my mother's hard eyes, my father's bowed head, Eloise's relaxed, perfectly straight posture. I was desperately looking for a single flicker of hesitation, a drop of regret, a tiny shred of parental love. There was nothing, just a united, unbreakable wall of justification. Mom, I didn't abandon the family, I said, my voice rising, vibrating off the cold glass walls. I went to college. I built a professional career so I wouldn't have to beg you for rent money. You left when we needed you most, my mother snapped, her tone turning venomous. The polite, rehearsed mask was finally slipping. Eloise stayed and sacrificed her 20s for this business. She's earned this. Earned what? I demanded, my hands gripping the armrests of my chair so hard my fingers ached. Everything, the house, the business, and $1 million in cash. Eloise finally spoke. She set her coffee cup down with a soft, delicate clink. Her voice dripped with fake, sugary concern. Gwen, look at yourself. You have a great job at a top firm. You're completely stable. You don't need this money. That is entirely not the point. My whole body was shaking now. I couldn't stop the tremors traveling up my arms. This isn't a charity case about who needs it more. This is about fairness. It's about recognizing that you have 2 daughters, not 1. Family is about showing up and being there. My mother cut in sharply, her eyes flashing with pure anger. And you've always been difficult, Gwen. Always questioning our decisions. Always making things so incredibly complicated. Difficult. The word hit me right in the chest, knocking the air out of my lungs. I was difficult because I demanded the truth. I was complicated because I warned them about IRS audits and refused to smile quietly while Eloise treated the company accounts like her personal piggy bank. You're difficult because you only think about yourself and your spreadsheets, my mother continued relentlessly, driving the knife deeper and twisting it. When we needed help managing the floor, you were in Seattle chasing promotions. Eloise was here, breathing sawdust, working beside us every single day. My father nodded slowly, finally looking up at me. His eyes were blank, completely empty of the warmth I remembered from my childhood. Your sister has proven herself, Gwen. The business requires massive capital to keep running. We need someone dependable to hold the assets so the company doesn't get chopped up. Dependable. My CPA brain screamed against the sheer absurdity of the lie. The girl who was expensing secret luxury spa trips through the company ledger was their definition of dependable. I sat there and thought about the crushing student loans I had paid off entirely alone, the college graduation ceremony they skipped, the Thanksgivings I'd worked double shifts at a diner just to afford a train ticket home, only to spend the entire dinner hearing about Eloise's brand new car. My ledger was perfectly balanced. Theirs was built on a massive, heartbreaking lie. And suddenly, I realized there was absolutely nothing I could say to fix it. We think you'll understand eventually, when the anger fades, my mother added. Her voice had suddenly softened, dropping into a sickeningly sweet, condescending tone that made my skin crawl. It was the voice she used when speaking to a toddler who had just dropped an ice cream cone.
This is what's best to protect the family legacy, Gwen. We have to look at the big picture.
I slowly turned my head and looked directly at Eloise. She was staring intently at the dark surface of her coffee, offering no defense. She didn't protest. She didn't say, "Hey, maybe we should at least leave Gwen the house." She was just sitting there, quietly taking it all. "Do you have anything to say?" I asked her. My voice had dropped to a whisper, but in that silent room it carried like a shout. Eloise looked up briefly. I watched her face for any sign of guilt, but her eyes were completely dead. A tiny, almost imperceptible twitch pulled at the corner of her mouth. "I think Mom and Dad have made their decision," she said softly, her tone completely hollow. "We should respect their wishes." That was it. That was the moment the last fragile string tying me to my family snapped. I stood up. The heavy leather chair scraped loudly against the polished hardwood floor. The sound violently shattered the quiet of the room. Leonard Goldstein jumped slightly in his seat, looking momentarily startled. He quickly adjusted his glasses. "Miss Thompson," he said, holding up a thick stack of papers. "Would you like to take some time to review the legal documents? You have the right to look them over in a separate room." "No, thank you," I said. My voice was eerily calm now. The shaking in my hands had stopped, replaced by a freezing mechanical precision. "I understand the situation perfectly." My mother frowned, her fake sweetness instantly vanishing. She was annoyed that I wasn't pleading, that I wasn't crying and begging for scraps. "Gwen, don't be dramatic. Sit down, we aren't finished." "I'm not being dramatic, Mom. I'm just leaving. You got what you wanted. I'm legally out of your hair." I picked up my purse and turned to my sister. I smiled at her. It wasn't a bitter smile, and it wasn't angry. It was the tired, relieved smile of someone who had just survived a terrible illness. "Congratulations, Eloise. I truly hope managing all this works out for you." Her eyes widened slightly, unnerved by my sudden, chilling calm. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her perfectly rehearsed posture finally breaking. "Gwen, you're acting like we've committed a crime against you," my father said, standing up quickly. He gestured to the table, his face flushed. "This is a practical, tax-efficient business decision. It's about protecting the assets." "I get it, Dad," I replied softly. "It's just business, not family." I walked toward the heavy oak door. The thick carpet swallowed the sound of my footsteps, but as my hand grasped the cold brass handle, a thought that had been nagging at the back of my mind suddenly pushed its way to the surface. It was a missing piece of data. I paused and turned back around. "Just out of professional curiosity," I said, looking directly at my father. "What happened to Grandma Delilah's personal money? Her will set up a trust fund specifically for me and Eloise. Equal shares." I remember her estate lawyer mentioning it at the funeral. The room went completely, terrifyingly still. The low hum of the air conditioning suddenly sounded like a jet engine. Leonard Goldstein, who had been quietly shuffling his papers into a neat stack, completely froze. His hands stopped moving. My father's flushed face instantly drained of color, turning a sickly pale gray. My mother's face hardened into a mask of pure stone. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine like targeting lasers. "That money," she started, her voice tight and defensive, she swallowed hard, "was absorbed. It went toward family expenses, maintaining the house, upgrading the business equipment, things that benefited everyone, including you, since it kept our family afloat." She lifted her chin, daring me to challenge her. "It benefited the family," I nodded slowly. "As an auditor, I spent my life analyzing narratives for logical flaws, and my mother's story was suddenly full of them. The timeline didn't add up, the logical consistency was completely broken. My grandmother's will was legally binding. That money couldn't just be absorbed into a business account without my explicit signature. They hadn't just written me out of their own legacy. They had stolen the one thing that was actually mine." "Right," I whispered, the puzzle pieces finally locking together in my brain. "The family." I pushed the heavy door open. "Gwen," my mother called out. For the first time all morning, there was a genuine hint of panic in her voice. "Don't leave like this. Don't act like you're some kind of victim." I looked back at her one last time. The woman who had given birth to me looked like a complete stranger. "I'm not acting like a victim, Mom," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the empty hallway. "I'm just an auditor who finally sees the whole ledger. I'm going home." I walked out, letting the heavy door click firmly shut behind me. The hallway was dead quiet. The second I was out of their sight, my knees nearly gave out. My hands began to shake so violently I could barely hold my car keys. But as I walked toward the elevator, I stared straight ahead, absolutely refusing to let a single tear fall. I sat in my car in the underground parking garage for 25 minutes. My hands rested heavily on the steering wheel, but I couldn't bring myself to put the key in the ignition. The concrete walls felt like a tomb. Somewhere in the dark, A leaky pipe dripped water onto the cement, a hollow, echoing sound that measured the passing seconds. Suddenly, my phone buzzed against the center console, lighting up the dark interior of the car. It was a text from my mother. "You're overreacting as usual. Call me when you calm down and apologize." I stared at the glowing letters. Apologize. My thumb hovered over the screen. I swiped the notification away, tossed the phone into the glove box, and slammed it shut. The drive up the rainy Interstate 5 North back to Seattle was a blur of red taillights and sweeping windshield wipers. The rhythmic thump-thump of the blades matched the beating of my heart. My mother's words looped relentlessly in my mind. That money went toward family expenses. Family expenses. Family expenses. But my brain, trained for years to spot missing variables and hidden errors, kept hitting a solid wall. That statement was a direct contradiction to a memory I had buried deep down. I remembered the months before Grandma Delilah's funeral with crystal clarity. I had been 29, completely exhausted from working 60-hour weeks at a junior accounting firm, and drowning in the last heavy waves of my student debt. We were at a restaurant for her 85th birthday dinner. The main dining room was loud, but Grandma Delilah had pulled me aside into a quiet, carpeted hallway near the back. Her body was frail, wrapped in a thick wool shawl, but her eyes were as sharp and clear as shattered glass. She smelled of old paper and lavender. Suddenly she gripped my hand. Her fingers dug into my skin with surprising, desperate strength. "I've set up an ironclad trust for you and Eloise," she had whispered, looking nervously over my shoulder to make sure my parents weren't walking up behind us. "Equal shares, Gwen. I want you both to have ultimate security." "Grandma, you don't have to do that," I had started to say, but she squeezed my hand harder, silencing me. "It's already finalized, sweetheart," she insisted, her voice trembling with intense urgency. "I know exactly how your father operates. I see the way he looks at you compared to your sister. I want you protected. My personal lawyer, Penelope, has the legal documents. $600,000, $300,000 for each of you. It is untouchable by your father. Do you understand me? Untouchable." At her funeral, her lawyer had briefly mentioned the trust distribution during the reception, but my parents had instantly swooped in. They cornered me by the coat rack, speaking in soft, tragic voices. They pointed out my demanding new job in Seattle. They promised to handle the complex probate paperwork on my behalf so I wouldn't have to worry about court dates while grieving. I had been too grief-stricken, too emotionally overwhelmed by my new career and the loss of the only person who truly saw me, to ask the hard legal questions. Like an idiot, I had trusted my own parents. By the time I saw the Seattle skyline glowing softly through the rain, my grief had completely metabolized. It had burned away, leaving behind pure, freezing focus. The heartbroken daughter was gone. The auditor had taken over. When I unlocked the door to my apartment at 10 p.m., I bypassed the kitchen entirely. I didn't even turn on the overhead lights. I dropped my wet coat on the floor, sat down at my small dining table, and opened my laptop. The screen cast a harsh, pale blue glow over my face. My professional email archive was meticulous, dating back 14 years. Every file, every correspondence was perfectly tagged. I typed into the search bar, Delilah Wakefield, my grandmother's maiden name, which she strictly used for all her financial matters. 52 results populated on the screen. My heart beat heavily in my throat as I scrolled past old holiday photos, forwarded recipes, and mundane check-ins. Then, near the bottom, dated December 9th, exactly 6 years ago, just 3 weeks after her funeral, I found it. Subject: Estate Documents, Delilah Ann Wakefield. From P. Miller at pmillerlaw.com. I clicked the email. The text was brief and formal. Dear Miss Thompson, per your late grandmother's strict legal instructions, please find attached a courtesy copy of her last will and testament for your personal records. Should you have any questions about the distribution timeline of your designated assets, please contact our office immediately. Sincerely, Penelope Miller, estate attorney. I clicked the PDF attachment. 26 pages of dense legalese loaded onto my screen. My hands were perfectly steady now. I hit Control F and typed the word trust. The screen jumped to page 18, Section 8, Trust Fund Distribution. The text burned into my retinas like staring directly into the sun. The sum of $600,000 held in trust at Liberty Union Bank shall be divided equally between my granddaughters Gwendolyn Marie Thompson and Eloise Catherine Thompson, each receiving exactly $300,000. This distribution shall occur directly to the beneficiaries no later than 120 days following my death. Administered by Penelope Miller, escrow. These funds are not subject to parental oversight. Equal shares, no later than 120 days, not subject to parental oversight. I checked the timestamp on the email again. 6 years ago. I had never received a dime, not a cashier's check, not a wire transfer, not even a letter explaining a delay. I read the paragraph 5 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. I wasn't. The math was perfect. The timeline was undeniable. The crime was clear. I hit the print command. The mechanical, rhythmic whir of the printer was the only sound in the apartment as it spit out the 26 pages. I carefully gathered the warm sheets of paper, placed them inside a thick manila folder labeled Grandma's Will, and locked it inside my bottom desk drawer. Then I sat in the dark for a very long time, listening to the heavy rain hit the glass, feeling the last remaining pieces of my childhood shatter into dust. 3 weeks after the lawyer meeting, the public gloating began. I was sitting at my kitchen island, sipping my morning coffee and preparing to log into my firm's secure server. The Seattle sky outside my window was a flat, bruised gray. My phone resting on the counter chimed, a bright, cheerful notification sound that felt completely out of place in my quiet apartment. A friend-based notification popped up on the lock screen. Eloise had tagged me in a photo. I unlocked the phone. The image loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, until it filled the screen. It was a picture of Eloise standing on the sprawling wraparound front porch of our childhood home. She was wearing a crisp white dress, holding up a crystal glass of champagne. The morning sunlight caught the bubbles in the glass. The caption read, "Officially the lady of the house. Thank you so much, Mom and Dad, for trusting me with our family legacy. Blood is thicker than water. Family is absolutely everything." 74 likes in an hour. I scrolled down, my thumb hovering over the glass screen. The comments were sickeningly sweet.
"So happy for you. You deserve it so much for all your hard work." Then I saw a comment from my Aunt Kathy. "Your grandmother would be so incredibly proud to see you take over."
I stared at my aunt's comment until the letters started to blur and run together. My chest tightened. My grandmother wouldn't be proud. She would be horrified. Suddenly my phone buzzed again. A private message from Samantha, an old high school friend who still lived in Bellevue. "Hey Gwen, I just saw Eloise's crazy post. Did your parents seriously just give her the 1.4 mil house? Are you okay? Did you get bought out or something?" I watched the little typing bubble bounce on the screen. I typed out a response. "They stole my inheritance and gave her everything." I stared at the words. Then I hit backspace and deleted the whole thing. I typed, "My parents are frauds." I deleted that too. Finally, I pulled up my professional shield. I typed, "I'm fine, Sam. Family dynamics are complicated. I'm happy for her." Over the next week, the digital assault continued. Eloise posted constantly. A photo of her sitting in my father's heavy leather chair at the woodworking warehouse, labeled CEO. A picture of a thick stack of bank paperwork on the kitchen table, labeled Thompson Trust Fund, securing the bag. A perfectly lit selfie with our parents, captioned, "So grateful for their financial guidance and faith in me." Not one single mention of me. I wasn't in the photos, the captions, or the memories. My mother enthusiastically shared every single post, adding rows of heart emojis and comments like, "So proud of my brilliant Eloise." I didn't block them. I didn't leave an angry comment. I just opened a secure cloud drive on my laptop. One by one, I took high-resolution screenshots of every single post, making sure the timestamps and dates were clearly visible. I dragged them into a folder. I was an auditor. I collected receipts. 2 months later, my mother threw the coronation party. I found out via a video on Snapbook. I was sitting on my couch in Seattle, 900 miles away from my family's reality, watching a highly produced video loop silently on my phone. String lights draped across the sprawling, manicured backyard of the Oak Street house. I could see catered tables draped in white linen, an open bar, and at least 40 people laughing and drinking. A massive vinyl banner hung across the back porch. It read, "Congratulations, Eloise, CEO." I watched the video play again. There was my father raising a heavy glass of scotch, his face red from laughing. My mother beaming as she hugged Eloise tightly. Leonard Goldstein, the lawyer, eating shrimp cocktail near the patio heater. My uncle Timothy. Even Samantha's parents. Everyone we knew in town was there, warm and glowing under the golden lights. I hadn't even received a pity invitation. In the comment section beneath the video, my cousin Melanie asked, "Wait, the party looks amazing. Where is Gwen? Is she taking the picture?" Eloise replied directly just minutes later.
Gwen's just really busy with her corporate job in Seattle. She couldn't make the drive down. Couldn't make the drive. The casual cruelty of the lie was breathtaking. As if I'd been invited and callously declined. My mother, who lived on social media, saw the comment and simply liked it. She didn't correct her. I sat alone in the dark, watching them actively celebrate erasing me. The silence in my apartment was deafening. My phone stayed completely quiet for the rest of the night. I stood up, poured my lukewarm tea down the sink, turned off my phone, and went to sleep. 4 months after I was legally disowned, my phone rang. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was taking a short break from a massive corporate audit, staring blankly at the gray wall of my cubicle. The phone vibrated violently against the desk. I glanced at the caller ID. The name made my stomach knot instantly into a tight, hard ball. Eloise? We hadn't spoken a single word since I walked out of Goldstein's office. The cursor on my screen blinked. I considered letting it go straight to voicemail, but the analytical part of my brain, the part that hated unsolved puzzles, won out. I picked up the phone and hit accept. "Hello, Gwen." "Hi," I said, my voice perfectly flat. "It's Eloise. I know how caller ID works. What do you need?"
She let out a forced, awkward laugh. The sound was thin and brittle, completely lacking the triumphant energy of her social media posts.
"Wow, straight to the point, huh? Look, I need to ask you a huge favor. It's kind of an emergency." I leaned back in my chair.
I waited, saying absolutely nothing. The silence stretched over the line. I could hear her breathing, short and shallow. Finally, she cracked.
My house, needs a completely new roof," she said rapidly, the words tumbling over each other. "There was a massive storm last week, and the inspector found severe water damage in the attic. Black mold risk. It can't wait, Gwen. I need to borrow $18,000 for the contractors to start tomorrow."
I blinked, genuinely stunned by the sheer audacity. "You are calling to ask me to loan you $18,000? Just temporarily," she pleaded, her voice rising in pitch. "I swear I'll pay you back in 4 months. With interest if you want." I closed my eyes. "Eloise, you literally just inherited a $1.4 million house, a wildly profitable business, and a trust fund worth nearly $1 million. Why are you begging your disinherited sister for cash?" Dead silence on the line. The only sound was the faint, static hum of the connection. "Eloise, it's tied up right now," she stammered. Her voice had lost all its arrogant edge. She sounded small, panicked. "I made some aggressive investments to grow the trust, really good, high-yield ones, but they're not liquid at the exact moment." "What kind of investments?" I asked, my tone shifting into my sharpest, most professional CPA voice. "Real estate, municipal bonds, mutual funds? That's not really your concern, Gwen," she snapped defensively. "That's proprietary." My jaw tightened. "You are asking me for 18 grand, but you won't tell me why you can't access almost $1 million in cash? Why don't you just take out a home equity line of credit on the house?" Her voice trembled. A tiny raw sound of fear slipped through. I tried to get a HELOC, okay, but the bank flagged my accounts. They put a hard security hold on my credit because of my recent international wire transfers. I can't borrow a dime from the bank right now. International wire transfers. Every single alarm bell in my head started screaming. The room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Normal businesses like Thompson Custom Woodworks didn't do massive international wire transfers, and banks didn't freeze accounts entirely unless they suspected serious criminal-level fraud. "I'm asking you because you're my sister and I need help," she pleaded, a sudden nasty edge of anger creeping into her panic. "The roof is literally caving in. Do you want Mom and Dad's legacy to rot?" "It's not Mom and Dad's legacy anymore," I said softly, staring at my computer screen. "It's your house." I took a deep breath, centering myself, pushing away the ghost of the little girl who just wanted her family to love her. "Eloise, I don't have $18,000 in liquid cash to just hand you." "Yes, you do," she yelled into the phone, her panic fully boiling over into rage. "You're a senior accountant at a top firm. You make excellent money. You don't even have a mortgage." "I also pay Seattle rent," I replied, my voice turning to ice. "I just finished paying off the student loans you never had to take, and I have my own expenses. I am not your emergency fund." "You've always been a selfish bitch, Gwen. You know that?" The insult was so predictable, so perfectly aligned with my mother's script, that a short, dry laugh actually escaped my lips.
"I'll be sure to write that down, Eloise," I said quietly. "Good luck with the mold."
I pulled the phone away from my ear. hit the red button, and immediately blocked her number. I sat in the silence of my cubicle, my heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Something massive was moving in the dark, and I knew, with absolute certainty, it was about to drag them all under. 5 months after the lawyer meeting, the real dominoes finally started to fall. It was late on a Thursday afternoon. The Seattle sky outside my office window was already darkening, bruised with heavy rain clouds. The firm was quiet, most of the staff having already logged off for the day. I was at my desk, meticulously cross-referencing a corporate tax ledger, lost in the comforting, predictable rhythm of the numbers. Then, my cell phone lit up. It vibrated violently against the hard surface of my desk. The screen displayed an unknown Seattle number, a standard 206 area code. I stared at it for a moment. Normally, I let unknown calls go straight to voicemail, but a strange, prickling sensation at the back of my neck told me to answer. I picked it up and hit the green button. Gwendolyn Thompson speaking. "Is this Gwendolyn Marie Thompson?" a woman asked. Her voice was incredibly sharp, clipped, and deeply professional. It was the voice of someone whose time was extremely expensive. "Yes, who is calling?" "My name is Penelope Miller. I am an estate attorney. I represent the estate of the late Delilah Ann Wakefield." I sat up so fast my office chair wheeled backward, hitting the filing cabinet with a loud thud. The breath rushed completely out of my lungs. Grandma Delilah's lawyer, the woman who had sent me the email with the will 6 years ago, the ghost from my locked desk drawer, was suddenly on the phone. "Miss Thompson, are you there?" "I'm here," I managed to say, my hand gripping the edge of the desk. "What is this regarding?" "I'm calling because a federal agency recently subpoenaed the financial records of your family's trust," Penelope said, her tone devoid of any pleasantries. "As a result, my law firm is conducting a mandatory internal audit of the asset distribution following Mrs. Wakefield's death. According to our locked legal records, you were explicitly designated to receive a lump sum of $300,000 from her trust. I need you to legally confirm, on a recorded line, whether you ever received those funds." The office around me seemed to fade away. The hum of the servers, the patter of rain on the glass, it all vanished. "No," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I never received a single cent." I heard the rapid, aggressive clacking of a mechanical keyboard on the other end of the line. She was documenting my response in real time. "Nothing at all?" Penelope pressed, her voice tightening. "No cashier's check, no wire transfer, no subsequent communication from our office or from your father regarding the deposit?" "Absolutely nothing. My parents told me the money was absorbed into general family expenses to maintain their woodworking business." The typing stopped abruptly. The silence on the line was heavy and dangerous.
"Miss Thompson, that is legally impossible," Penelope said, her words clipping together like ice cracking. "According to the irrevocable trust documents, that money was specifically designated for you and your sister individually. It was to be dispersed directly into your personal, independent accounts. It was emphatically not meant for general family use, business maintenance, or parental oversight."
"I know," I said, a cold, hard knot forming in my chest.
"I have a copy of the will."
"I printed it from an email your office sent me 6 years ago. I kept it."
I heard Penelope let out a low, breathy exhale that sounded dangerously close to a curse. "Thank God you kept it, Miss Thompson. I need you to think very carefully before you answer my next question. Did you ever, at any point in the weeks following your grandmother's death, sign a waiver or a power of attorney releasing your claim to those funds to your father?"
"Never. I was never presented with any legal documents. They told me they were handling the probate because I was busy with my accounting job in Seattle." Penelope Miller fell silent. When she finally spoke again, her voice was grim, stripped of its corporate polish. "This is highly illegal, Miss Thompson. According to the bank records we just pulled under federal order, the full $600,000 was transferred into a family trust account, controlled entirely by your father as a temporary trustee. In order to bypass the direct deposit rule, he submitted a notarized document to the bank." She paused, as if gathering herself. "He claimed in writing that you were financially unstable, heavily in debt, unreachable, and mentally unfit to manage a large sum of money. He requested, and was granted, emergency conservatorship over your portion of the estate." The room started to spin. My vision narrowed. Financially unstable, heavily in debt, unreachable. My own father. The man who watched me work night shifts at a grease-stained diner for 4 years just to pay my tuition. The man who knew I was a licensed, rigorously tested, certified public accountant. He had legally assassinated my character on paper. He had branded me unstable and incompetent, just to steal the safety net my grandmother had built for me. And he had used that stolen money to fund the very business he had just handed over to my sister. It wasn't just favoritism, it was calculated, malicious fraud. That was a forged document, Penelope stated flatly. That was felony estate fraud. And I have a fiduciary duty to correct it immediately. I will be formally contacting your parents and their attorney, Leonard Goldstein. They are in severe breach of fiduciary duty. I closed my eyes, pressing my fingertips against my throbbing temples. Wait, you mentioned a federal agency subpoenaed the records. Why? What triggered this? Penelope hesitated. I could hear the lawyer in her weighing what she could legally disclose. I cannot discuss the full details of an ongoing federal investigation, but I will tell you this. I noticed highly irregular, massive activity regarding the $900,000 trust fund that was recently transferred wholly to your sister Eloise. Massive offshore withdrawals, rapid wire transfers to flagged accounts in the Cayman Islands. Eloise's panicked voice from a month ago echoed in my head, loud and terrifyingly clear. My recent international wire transfers. The bank flagged my accounts. I can't borrow a dime. The FBI is aggressively looking into where that money went. Penelope continued, and that is exactly how they stumbled onto your missing $300,000. They followed the money backward. I sat perfectly still. The golden child had taken the stolen crown, and in her breathtaking arrogance, she had accidentally walked it straight into a federal trap. Miss Thompson, I want to be extremely clear, Penelope said, her voice softening just a fraction. You are a victim here. You have done absolutely nothing wrong. My sole job now is to legally compel your family to produce the $300,000 your grandmother intended for you. Do I have your permission to proceed aggressively on your behalf? I opened my eyes. The shock was gone. The heartbreak was gone. All that was left was the auditor. Cold, precise, and ready to balance the ledger. You have my full permission, I said smoothly. Tear them apart. Excellent. Do not speak to your family. Do not warn them. Things are about to get very ugly. I hung up the phone and set it gently face down on my desk. I stared out at the rainy Seattle skyline. I hadn't wanted revenge. I had just wanted to walk away, to heal, to live a quiet life free of their shadow. But karma wasn't just knocking on my family's front door. It was coming up the driveway with a federal battering ram. Let me pause here for a second. If you're still listening to this story, I have to ask you something. Have you ever uncovered a massive, devastating lie in your own family? Have you ever had to choose between protecting family secrets and demanding absolute justice? Drop a comment below. I read every single one, and your stories give me strength. And if you think this story is worth sharing, please hit that like button. Because now, we are getting to the climax. This is exactly how my family's empire officially burned to the ground. I was standing in front of a massive glass whiteboard in a high-stakes corporate boardroom, explaining third-quarter tax liabilities to a room full of serious executives. My phone was face down on the polished mahogany table, right next to my laser pointer. Suddenly it vibrated. A harsh, angry buzz against the hard wood. Then it buzzed twice. Then 5 times in rapid succession. I kept my voice perfectly steady, tracing a revenue line on the chart. But my eyes darted to the black screen. It didn't stop. It vibrated continuously for 20 agonizing minutes, shaking so hard it slowly spun itself across the smooth table. When the meeting finally adjourned and the executives filed out the glass doors, I grabbed the phone. The lock screen was flooded. 48 missed calls, 12 from my mother, 6 from my father, 30 from Eloise, 26 frantic text messages. I scrolled through the notifications, my blood turning to ice water in my veins. Eloise, Gwen, call me now. Eloise, please, I'm begging you. This is serious. My father, pick up the phone immediately. My mother, GWN, this is an emergency. The most recent text, sent just 90 seconds ago by my mother, made my breath hitch. The FBI is here with guns. Call me. I stepped out of the boardroom and into a small, soundproof glass phone booth down the hall. I shut the heavy door, sealing myself in complete silence, and dialed my mother's number. She picked up on the first half ring. Gwen, oh my God, finally. She wasn't just crying, she was shrieking, gasping for air like she was drowning in deep water. Mom, breathe, I said, my voice deadly calm. What is happening? They're here. The FBI is at Eloise's house right now, she sobbed. Through the phone, I could hear a terrifying symphony of chaos. Heavy boots stomping across hardwood floors, walkie-talkies buzzing, the loud crunch of breaking wood. They came in dark windbreakers with a federal search warrant. They're boxing up her computers, the business files, the ledgers, everything.
Why? What is the warrant for? I leaned my shoulder against the cool glass of the booth, closing my eyes. They're saying something about international embezzlement, wire fraud, money laundering. She choked on a violent sob. Gwen, what did Eloise do with that trust fund money? They're treating her like a drug cartel boss. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. Mom, I have no idea. I haven't seen the business books in 3 years. But Eloise told the agents that you were the accountant. My mother shrieked, her panic bleeding into desperate accusation. She told them you audited the business and approved her investments.
She said this is your fault because you gave her bad advice. A freezing, absolute fury washed over me. The sheer, shameless cowardice of it all. Even now, standing in the rubble of her own disastrous choices, surrounded by federal agents, my sister was trying to throw me under the bus to save her own skin. I heard a loud crash over the line, followed by a man shouting gruffly. Then my father's voice suddenly cut through the chaos. Martha, get off the phone. Goldstein says we can't talk to anyone. This is our daughter, Richard. She's a CPA. My mother screamed back at him. The phone fumbled, plastic scraping loudly against a hard surface. And then my father's breathless voice came on the line. He slipped instantly into his authoritative CEO tone, treating me not like a daughter, but like a disobedient employee. Gwen, listen to me very carefully, he barked. We need a forensic accountant right now. Goldstein is a real estate and estate guy. He's completely useless here. We need you to come down to Bellevue immediately. Take over the books and prove to the FBI that Eloise didn't have criminal intent. We need you to untangle these wires and show she was just a victim of a scam. Dad, stop. My voice was a scalpel, cutting clean through his frantic orders. I am not doing that. What do you mean you're not doing that? He roared, his voice cracking with desperation. She's your sister. If you audit the books and testify that she lacks the financial literacy to be a mastermind, we can mitigate the federal charges. You have the credentials to fix this. Dad, if I step in and conduct a fake forensic audit to cover up her gross negligence, I become an accessory to a federal crime. I shot back, the years of repressed anger finally snapping into sharp focus. I will lose my CPA license. I will go to federal prison. She forged tax documents 3 years ago. She threw away $700,000 without doing a shred of due diligence, and you want me to risk my entire life to save her from her own stupidity? We are family, he screamed into the phone. The sheer entitlement in his voice was thick and ugly. You haven't been my family since April, I replied. My voice was no longer shaking, it was perfectly steady, perfectly cold. You disinherited me, you gave her everything because she was so dependable. Well, depend on her now. Hire a criminal defense attorney. I pulled the phone away from my ear and hit the red button. My hands were completely still. I didn't feel sad. I felt like a surgeon who had just successfully removed a rotting appendix. I walked back to my cubicle, sat down, and opened a web browser. I searched FBI raid Bellevue, Washington. A local news outlet had just posted an urgent breaking article, complete with a blurry photo of federal vehicles parked on the familiar driveway of my childhood home. FBI raids Bellevue woodworking CEO in major financial fraud sweep. The article detailed a sweeping investigation into a massive international pyramid scheme and money laundering operation. The homeowner allegedly wired over $700,000 of liquid trust assets directly into offshore accounts linked to the criminal syndicate. $700,000. She had completely drained the trust fund, leaving just enough behind to pretend everything was fine. My desk phone suddenly rang. I picked it up. Miss Thompson, I assume you've seen the news. Penelope Miller's sharp, professional voice asked. My mother just called me screaming, I said, staring blankly at the article. The FBI is tossing the house. I want to officially assure you that you are completely in the clear, Penelope said smoothly. The FBI agent in charge contacted me 2 days ago. When they traced the origin of the $700,000 Eloise wired to the Caymans, they subpoenaed the original estate records. The feds noticed that you were legally owed half of the original seed money. I provided them with my locked records proving you never received it. You are officially classified as a defrauded victim in this federal case. I let out a long, slow breath. The invisible weight I had been carrying for 6 years finally lifted. What exactly did Eloise do? She fell for an incredibly obvious high-yield investment scam run by an offshore syndicate, Penelope explained, her tone laced with deep professional disgust.
A man calling himself Mitchell Sterling promised her a 200% return in 3 years. Instead of consulting a fiduciary or a financial advisor, your sister logged into her bank portal and wired $700,000 of family trust money directly into an unregulated crypto exchange in the Bahamas. It vanished instantly. "So she's broke," I whispered. "Worse," Penelope said. Her voice turned incredibly sharp, like a sword being drawn from a scabbard. "She's facing federal wire fraud charges for moving the money across international lines without proper disclosures. But here is the critical part for you, Gwen. Because your parents committed estate fraud by forging documents to deny you your $300,000 inheritance, that money is legally considered stolen debt. And federal courts do not look kindly on stolen inheritances. But the money is gone," I said, a dull ache returning. "Always gave it to scammers." "The cash is gone," Penelope corrected fiercely, "but the assets are not. I have already filed an emergency injunction. We are going to force the liquidation of the Bellevue property and the woodworking business to make you whole." The legal fallout was catastrophic.
It moved with the cold, unstoppable force of a glacier, crushing everything in its path. I didn't have to face my family in a courtroom. The paperwork did all the fighting for me. A month later, Eloise stood before a federal judge and formally pleaded guilty to gross financial negligence. It was the only way she could avoid spending years in a federal prison. As part of her plea deal, she was slapped with $250,000 in federal fines, ordered to complete 600 hours of community service, and permanently banned from holding any executive or financial role in any business for the rest of her life. The Golden Child was now legally certified by the United States government as a fraud. But the real, crushing punishment came from the probate court. Because my father had illegally funneled my $300,000 into the family trust, which he then handed directly to Eloise, the judge ruled that I was a primary secured creditor. In order to pay Eloise's massive federal fines, her expensive defense lawyers, and my legally owed $300,000, there was only one mathematical option left on the board. They had to liquidate absolutely everything. Thompson Custom Woodworks, the business my father had poured his blood and sweat into for 35 years, was auctioned off to a rival corporate manufacturer for pennies on the dollar. I sat at my desk in Seattle and looked at the public auction listings online. I saw photos of his massive cedar saws and hand-built workbenches, all tagged with bright yellow auction stickers. Then came the house. The beautiful $1.4 million Oak Street home where I grew up was seized and sold in a rapid, aggressive estate sale. I scrolled through the real estate photos, looking at my empty childhood bedroom. It looked so small, so cold. My parents, who had spent their entire lives envisioning a wealthy, powerful retirement presiding over a local empire, were suddenly forced to rent a cramped, poorly lit two-bedroom apartment in a much cheaper neighboring town. Eloise had to move into their tiny spare room. She was bankrupt, disgraced, and completely unemployable. The kingdom they had built on lies had collapsed into dust. The day the final court order went through, I checked my mail. There was a thick, certified envelope from Penelope Miller's law firm. Inside was a cashier's check. It was printed on heavy, watermarked paper. Exactly $300,000. I ran my thumb over the raised ink of the zeros. This was the money generated from the forced sale of the house my parents had proudly given to Eloise. My inheritance had finally come to me, rising directly from the ashes of their favoritism. I sat at my small kitchen table, the rain beating softly against the glass window. I stared at the check. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't smile, or cheer, or post a picture of it online to gloat. I just felt a profound, heavy exhaustion settled deep in my bones. My ledger was finally balanced, but the ink was drawn from a tragedy. The universe had corrected the scales, but the cost was the total annihilation of my family. Suddenly, my phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up the dark room. It was a text message from my mother. It was her first direct communication since the day of the FBI raid. My heart gave a slow, heavy thump. I unlocked the screen and read the message. "The house is officially sold today. The business your father built with his bare hands is completely gone. We are packing 30 years of memories into cheap cardboard boxes. We have absolutely nothing left. I hope you're finally happy now, Gwen. You got your money. You destroyed us." I sat in the quiet apartment and read the words 3 times. Not once did she say, "I'm sorry we forged documents and stole your inheritance." Not once did she say, "We should have listened to you." There was no self-reflection, no apology, Just blind, pathetic victimhood right to the bitter end. I felt a sudden vivid flash of memory, sitting at a sticky table at Chili's on my college graduation night, smelling like diner grease, watching my father ignore me to take a business call. I had spent my entire life trying to prove my worth to people who were deeply committed to misunderstanding me. I didn't type a reply. I didn't defend myself. I simply pressed her name on the screen, scrolled to the bottom and hit block. Then I blocked my father. Then I blocked Eloise. With 3 simple taps on a glass screen, I severed the last rotting strings connecting me to them. The silence that filled my apartment afterward was deep, pure, and absolutely beautiful. I took the $300,000 and did exactly what Grandma Delilah would have wanted me to do. I logged into my loan servicer's website, typed in my routing number, and paid off the last $52,000 of my student loans in one massive, final click. I watched the bold red balance drop instantly to 0. The physical relief was so intense I actually had to catch my breath. Then I put a solid down payment on a beautiful light-filled condo high above the Seattle skyline. It was a place entirely my own, with heavy locks on the doors where no one could ever make me feel small again. I took another $60,000 and anonymously endowed a scholarship at Seattle University's accounting program. I restricted the funds strictly to first-generation female students who lacked family financial support. I wanted to help the girls who, like me, were grinding it out alone in the dark, smelling like stale grease, fighting for a future no one else believed in. The rest of the money went into a secure, boring, highly regulated mutual fund. Sometimes on cold, rainy evenings, I sit out on my new balcony. I wrap my hands around a hot mug of tea and watch the massive ferries slowly cross the dark waters of Puget Sound. And I think about that freezing conference room in Bellevue. I think about my mother looking down her nose at me, calling me difficult because I refused to roll over and be a quiet victim. As I've gotten older, I've learned a very important lesson. When toxic people call you difficult, it is the highest compliment you can possibly receive. It means you are difficult to manipulate, difficult to exploit, difficult to silence. I didn't destroy my family. I didn't light the match that burned their empire down. Their own arrogance, their desperate need to coddle the golden child, and their casual, everyday cruelty destroyed them. I just refused to be the safety net that caught them when they finally jumped off the cliff. I am 35 years old. I have no parents, I have no sister, but for the very first time in my entire life, I have absolute peace, and nobody can ever take that away from me. There is a profound, quiet power in finally stepping away from the shadows of a toxic family and into the light of your own truth. Gwendolyn's journey is a raw reminder that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the silent click of a balanced ledger and the unyielding courage to protect your own peace. If this story's depth and pursuit of fairness resonated with you, please leave a like and subscribe to stay connected. We share these intense, true-to-life narratives because they reflect the heavy, beautiful reality of reclaiming your life and standing your ground. Drop a comment below to share your own experiences with setting boundaries. Your resilience inspires others, and you are never alone in this. Stay strong, protect your peace, and always audit the ledger.